I am Luis Moreno, and you are watching Whose Time.
泛美开发银行这家总部位于美国首都华盛顿，拥有48个成员国的多边开发银行，至今为止呢已经有57年的历史了。它成立的初衷是为了拉美国家的经济社会发展计划提供资金和技术的援助，也为海外投资进入拉美地区提供平台。中国呢是从1993年开始申请加入泛美开发银行的，并且于2009年初正式成为其正式成员国。泛美开发银行的现任行长莫雷诺今年已经63岁，来自哥伦比亚。早年间呢，他在美国学习，先后取得了佛罗里达州大西洋大学工商管理与经济学学士学位和雷鸟商学院的工商管理硕士学位。后来呢，从事媒体工作，曾经在哥伦比亚电视台担任一档重要新闻节目的监制。1991年起从政，进入哥伦比亚政府工作，曾经担任哥伦比亚经济发展部部长、哥伦比亚驻美大使等职。2005年10月起，他正式出任泛美开发银行行长，成为这家银行的第4任行长。在今年3月于北京出席2016中国发展高层论坛期间，莫雷诺接受了财新时间的专访，就泛美开发银行运作现状、中拉经济合作、巴西里约奥运会、气候融资等广泛的话题，回答了财新记者的提问。As we know, China has become a member of IDB in 2009 and recently joined the EBRD. So far, China complete all membership in our regional investment bank. So what were the experience of working with China over the years?
Well, for me, it's been a fascinating experience. It's given me the opportunity to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do, because prior to China joining the IDB, when I got to the bank in 2005, what I found was that China had been trying to join the IDB for almost 10 years. And I understood clearly that this was a very important factor. Even though it took 4 years to get the negotiation and finalize it and getting all the approvals, the minute that happened, as I remember telling Governor Joe Shushan, was, now that you're a member, I want to try to really help in whatever way we can to deepen the Latin American-China relationship. And that was already happening. I mean, there was a lot of, as you know, exports from Latin America to China, a lot of exports from China to Latin America. But equally, what I thought was very important was to deepen exchanges. Exchanges in what's typically called South-South cooperation, meaning, what are the best practices that Latin America can offer China, and likewise, what are the best practices that China can offer Latin America. And at the same time, we also worked a lot in the business exchange. And I feel very positive of the experience. We developed a co-financing line. We're now working in the process. Now China is a bigger shareholder of the bank, which I'm very happy to report. Here what we hope is to, again, develop more and more things together.
You mentioned the co-financing line. Is that co-financing with PBOC or? The
co-financing line comes basically with PBOC out of SAFE. This is a total of $2 billion. This line of credit, we have used about $1.2 billion already. We're now looking to expand it.
With AIIB, have you been talking in terms of possible collaboration?
Yes. I think AIIB is a very interesting model. It's something to observe. Certainly, the focus of AIIB is initially to be focused, at least at the beginning, just in Asia. But notwithstanding, we want to start to at least have a conversation of projects that will have an impact to Asia in infrastructure coming from Latin America. And here I'm talking about the Pacific of Latin America, especially of South America. So we're going to be looking at different ideas as we speak with AIB as well. Well, I think what's important to recognize is that the challenges that the world has, the development challenges the world have, are so big that clearly not one institution can do all the work. And it requires is the sum of institutions. And what I find more and more today, and the way I like to measure our own success, is that every time we enter into a project, how much more resources can we bring with us from a variety of institutions, be they public or private. And I think that's really the test for the future, and I think there's a lot of space to collaborate.
去2年，在世界经济增长放缓、大宗商品价格持续走低、国际贸易陷入低谷等不利因素的持续作用下，拉美地区的经济形势不容乐观。巴西、委内瑞拉等主要的拉美经济体面临着严重的经济衰退。对此呢，莫雷诺强调，拉美国家应该借鉴中国的经验，推动经济的结构性改革。而谈到中拉之间的经济合作，莫雷诺表示，希望未来拉美对于中国的贸易项目能够更加的多元化，能够进一步的带动拉美地区的出口。
So let's turn to Latin America for a bit, which is one of your endeavor area. Latin America economy has been undergoing some difficult times, especially the bigger economies. What do you see the trends emerging in the next few years?
Well, look, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that Latin America is many things. You have Mexico and Brazil being the two very large countries. Certainly Mexico is highly impacted by whatever happens in the US economy because they're largely integrated. Most of the trade in Mexico and the United States is across companies. So Ford Motor Company, Mexico selling to Ford Motor Company, US, as an example. Then equally, countries in Central America and the Caribbean have benefited from the moment of the slowdown and the changes in commodity prices, where fundamentally oil, because these countries are importers, the fact that today you pay less than half the price they were paying 2 years ago, it's in essence a fiscal stimulus to those economies. And those terms of trade that they have that have changed are helping those economies. And that's why you will see growth in Central America and the Caribbean anywhere from 3 to 4%. South America, of course, is more impacted by the prices of commodities, and especially oil. Countries like Venezuela, like Colombia, like Ecuador are feeling the pain of lower oil prices. And the growth certainly is slowing down because there is a lift-off in interest rates in the United States that has changed the capital flows going into Latin America. The fact that you have these commodity prices, the widening of exchange rates. So last year we had negative growth for the region. But if you take out the contraction in Venezuela, which was 10%, or if you take out the contraction in Brazil, which was 3.7%, the rest of the region did much better. And that is equally true this year. I mean, other economies, there will be a recession again in Venezuela this year. There probably will be another recession in Brazil. There will be perhaps flat growth in Argentina. So, taking those countries out, clearly the rest of the region is growing anywhere from 2.5% to 3%. Is that good growth? No. I think we should aspire to have higher growth. And that is going to depend on many of the issues that are now being discussed in your 5-year plan, which are about structural reforms. And that's what we need to do.
Let's ponder a bit about the Sino-Latin America economic relationship. Is the Sino-Latin American economic relationship getting better than the world picture? And what area mainly is?
No, look, I think there is, certainly we're in this down cycle, but what I think is important to watch is kind of the changes that have been taking place. The macroeconomic fundamentals are much better. You have solid banking systems. This is extremely important, especially in a down cycle. You want banks to be strong. You have macroeconomic stability. You have high volumes of reserves. All Latin American countries together have somewhere around $130 billion of reserves. So those are all positive things. So this is very different than, let's say, the decade of the 80s where we had tremendous challenges. Now, what is equally different is that we are in a much more globalized world. What happens in China certainly affects Latin America. What happens in the United States affects Latin America. What happens in Japan or in Europe.
It seems we get a lot of pressure from all the trade fronts and investment fronts. And there is a different approach in terms of whether you do high-profile projects or very solid projects that can real returns. what would be your recommendation for Chinese engagement in Latin America?
Look, I think we've advanced significantly in terms of the volumes of trade. Equally, the volumes of foreign direct investment, they're now about $4 billion a year. The bigger question is this. China basically trades with Latin America in fundamentally 4 commodities. And Latin Americans import many things from China. In fact, Latin Americans import, for every dollar we import, we only export 50 cents to China. So the question is how we diversify this trade offering. And it probably will have to be as we connect with supply chains. How the fact that today a Chinese company can source the Latin American markets and equally the North American markets better by establishing itself in Latin America as opposed to trying to export from China. You know well what's happened with real wages in China. They have increased significantly, and today there is a convergence of wage rates between China and Latin America. Add to that transport and logistics. Clearly, if I'm an entrepreneur, a manufacturer, a service provider in China, it makes more sense to have a presence in a country where I can serve equally those markets. And that's really what the next step of our relationship. I said jokingly that we have only these 4 major products and that our expansion now is with soccer players that you're also importing. But there's a limit to how many soccer players you can import to China. In fact, you just contracted 2 Brazilians and a Colombian recently.
And they do very well in China.
I'm sure they do very well, and I'm sure that China will continue to, we love to see Chinese learn soccer because it will give us good opportunity to have a different kind of exchange.
In terms of IDB's role in this Sino-Latin America relationship, is that mainly in infrastructure? Or I remember 2 years ago, you have this platform to facilitate business between Chinese and Latin America companies. How does that go, and what other efforts?
That is actually working very well. We're working with Alibaba, and actually we help. Alibaba is a partner of this platform. I think what his vision of how to connect markets and to connect markets within countries, I think is really something that we need to think about, of how technology enables a possibility of really connecting and shortening the distances that we have had historically.
Actually, not just China's economy is slowed down. Other MA economics are also suffering at this moment, like Brazil and Argentina. Do you think those trouble we face right now are going to continue or not for those countries?
It's a very different situation, that of Argentina and Brazil. I think you have a new government in Argentina. It's a new day in Argentina. They're doing some of the tough reforms that are required. You probably will see a lot of investment going to Argentina in the years ahead. Situation in Brazil is different. Brazil has basically a set of political challenges that I hope, for the good of Latin America, that they are solved. At the end of the day, Brazil is the most important country in Latin America, is the continental country. And I think for the good of Brazil, but for Latin America, I hope that there is a political solution that will allow Brazil fundamentally to take care of the more dire economic challenges. And I think they will in the final analysis. I think if I'm a betting man, I would be investing today. If I'm a Chinese, I would be investing today in Brazil. Why? Because you have a weaker exchange rate. The other question is the value of the equities in Brazil has come down because the economy is suffering. But if you're a long-term player, and typically the Chinese like to think in long-term, this is the time to go in.
将于今年8月举行的巴西里约热内卢奥运会正在渐行渐近。然而，伴随着相关筹备工作的推进，寨卡病毒的蔓延、政局的动荡、犯罪率的居高不下等问题也都亟待解决。莫雷诺表示，尽管外界有种种的质疑和担忧，但他相信巴西能够举办一届非常成功的奥运会。Speaking of Brazil, Brazil is hosting Olympics this summer, and this is the second time for the Latin American. The first time is 1968 in Mexico. What's your expectation?
I think that Brazil will have a very successful Olympics. And they will demonstrate a number of very important things, because there is a fundamental change in the transportation systems. 70% of the financing of all the Olympic investments were done largely by the private sector. Why? Because, for instance, the Olympic Village, all of these things will be eventually turned over to the private sector. And there will be venues like the Olympic pool, which is just temporary, it's beautiful, temporary, and then they will be taken somewhere else. So they've done this in a very smart way, and I applaud for what they're doing.
Olympic will help the Brazil's economic situation probably, and for national sentiment, I guess.
Oh, no question, and it was, when you had the Olympics, it had an effect on Beijing, of course, certainly on China as a whole, but especially in Beijing, and I think the same is going to be true in Brazil.
The US side said their athletes could not go there because of the health situation. I think that is something of a concern, perhaps, because of Zika.
Oh, the Zika virus, you mean? Well, look, I think the other untold story is how Brazil is dealing with it, and I think they're doing a lot of very good things. The other important fact to take into consideration is that during the time of the Olympics is the winter in Brazil, and so the changing weather matters a lot. You know, mosquitoes never survive the cold weather. And as you know, mosquitoes are basically the most important factor of disease in the world, be it malaria, in this case Zika, or Ebola, whatever. And so I believe that they are doing what needs to be done, which is to control by spraying the vector, or the mosquito in this case, looking at experimental ways. There's a number of genetically modified mosquitoes that are being developed to precisely create the capacity for them to stop reproducing, and equally being able to alert, and this is the most important part, alert societies as to how they have to be mindful of this and quickly go to health centers to be able to get a quick response. And they're doing all of that in Brazil.
近年来，为了帮助发展中国家解决日益严重的气候问题，全球的主要多边金融机构纷纷的加大了气候融资力度。在今年4月举行的理事会年会上，泛美开发银行就宣布，至2020年底，气候融资将实现翻倍，达到贷款总额的30%，并且呢，将专门新设气候变化与可持续发展部门，以支持有关国家履行巴黎气候变化大会上所做的承诺。
I mean, it's a great example of what happened in Paris. Is really the capacity that both the United States and China had to come together, and that basically created a momentum where other countries came together. And I think in the final analysis, it was a very good agreement. Now we're in the tough part, which is implementing this agreement. What China is doing in the G20 to put out there the question of climate finance. And China is doing already a lot in this regard, and we are all observing that and certainly want to learn from what you're doing. But this is the single most important thing. And the only way to do that is through what we call blended finance. There's got to be a grant component for studying the so-called INDCs. These were the targets that the governments did in terms of reductions of emissions, in terms of how do you turn that into actual projects. How do you develop infrastructure that is climate resilient? How do you fit for purpose? One of the things that we're doing at the bank is creating a whole division of the bank just to be able to mainstream all our climate finance. And we've actually been very aggressive in thinking of how do we double precisely that amount of climate finance that we're doing in the next 5 years.